We are pioneers and trailblazers. We fight for freedom. We transform our dreams into the truth. Our struggles will become a nation.
Welcome to an eye-opening journey through American history, inspired by the groundbreaking work Lies My Teacher Told Me by James W. Loewen. This book is an essential critique of how history has been taught in American classrooms, focusing on the inaccuracies, omissions, and biases that shape our understanding of the past. In this video, we'll dive into some of the biggest myths perpetuated in history textbooks, how they came to be, and what we can do to approach history with a clearer lens. Let's get started with our first major topic, how heroes are created in history books. The heroification of historical figures. One of the most pervasive issues in history textbooks is what Loewen calls heroification, a process that turns complex, flawed individuals into untouchable, heroic figures. Take the example of Helen Keller. Most people know her as the incredible woman who overcame blindness and deafness to communicate with the world. But textbooks rarely mention that Keller was also a passionate socialist and political activist who believed in the redistribution of wealth and questioned the foundations of capitalism. Her radical views, which were central to her life, are largely ignored because they don't fit the heroic image we're taught in school. The same happens with other figures, like Woodrow Wilson, known primarily as the president who led America through World War I and advocated for the League of Nations. Wilson is often portrayed as a champion of peace and progress, but textbooks frequently overlook his segregationist policies and his oppressive approach to dissent, such as his support for censorship and the suppression of anti-war activists. This selective storytelling leaves out the complicated, sometimes uncomfortable truths of these individuals' lives. The whitewashing of Native American history. Another significant topic in Lies My Teacher Told Me is the whitewashing of Native American history. Most students learn a simplified narrative that depicts Native Americans as passive characters who either helped or resisted European settlers. But Loewen shows how textbooks ignore the rich, diverse cultures of indigenous people and the devastating effects of European colonization.
Sitting Bull requested this council. We await his word.
Take your soldiers out of here. They scare the game away.
Very well, sir. Tell me then, how far away should I take my men?
You must take them out of our lands.
What precisely are your lands?
These are the lands where my people lived before you whites first came.
I don't understand. We whites were not your first enemies. Why don't you demand back the land in Minnesota where the Chippewa and others forced you from years before?
The Black Hills are sacred land given to my people by Wakantonka.
Not very convenient to cloak your claims in spiritualism.
For instance, the arrival of Columbus is often presented as a discovery, with minimal mention of the violence and exploitation that followed. Columbus enslaved indigenous people, initiated a brutal slave trade, and claimed lands already inhabited for European monarchs. This darker side of his voyages is frequently glossed over in classrooms, leading students to grow up without a full understanding of the profound harm done to native populations. Loewen argues that by omitting these realities, textbooks give an incomplete picture of American history. Recognizing the suffering and resilience of Native Americans is essential to understanding the complexities of America's past. And only by acknowledging this can we move toward a more accurate version of history. The myth of the lost cause and the Civil War. When it comes to the Civil War, many history books perpetuate the lost cause narrative, which presents the Confederate side as a noble fight for states' rights, rather than a battle to preserve slavery. This myth, which gained traction after the Civil War, minimizes slavery's central role and romanticizes the Southern cause. Loewen stresses that textbooks often fail to address how deeply slavery was embedded in American society and the economy. The Confederacy fought primarily to maintain the institution of slavery, yet history books still tiptoe around this uncomfortable truth. By perpetuating the lost cause myth, textbooks avoid confronting the brutal reality of slavery and the racial inequality that continues to impact American society. A full understanding of the Civil War requires us to confront these truths directly. Loewen urges readers and students to recognize that while history may be painful, avoiding it only serves to distort our understanding of the present. Reconstruction, a forgotten chapter. After the Civil War, the Reconstruction Era is another period that textbooks often misrepresent or gloss over entirely. This was a time when America had the opportunity to redefine itself, to provide rights and opportunities to freed slaves, and to build a more equitable society. However, textbooks tend to skip over Reconstruction or paint it as a failure due to corruption or mismanagement. Loewen points out that the Reconstruction Era was, in fact, a time of tremendous progress for African Americans, including the establishment of public schools, the election of black politicians, and the passing of landmark amendments aimed at equal rights. However, the backlash from white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan led to the era's abrupt end. By the time the federal government withdrew support, the promise of Reconstruction was left unfulfilled, leading to nearly a century of institutionalized racism under Jim Crow laws. This omission in textbooks not only distorts our understanding of post-Civil War America, but also conceals the root causes of systemic racism that are still evident today. The truth about social movements. Many textbooks sanitize or downplay social movements in U.S. history, especially when discussing labor movements, anti-war protests, or the fight for civil rights. Loewen emphasizes that textbooks often shy away from presenting these movements in their full, radical context, which leaves students with the impression that progress in America has always been gradual and inevitable. The civil rights movement, for example, is typically portrayed as a peaceful, universally accepted movement led by Martin Luther King Jr.
One day right now in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
While overlooking the fact that it was a complex, multifaceted struggle with widespread opposition, figures like Malcolm X or groups like the Black Panthers, who pushed for black empowerment and were often labeled as extremist, are typically sidelined in favor of narratives that don't challenge the status quo. By omitting the diversity of voices and tactics that shape these movements, textbooks fail to capture the urgency, struggle, and resistance that propelled social change. Loewen argues that true progress often arises from conflict and controversy, not the sanitized, inevitable progress suggested in textbooks. Myths about American exceptionalism. One of the biggest myths that Loewen critiques is the idea of American exceptionalism. The notion that the United States is uniquely virtuous, always on the side of justice and freedom. Textbooks frequently reinforce this belief by portraying America as a city on a hill, a nation that spreads democracy and fights for liberty worldwide. However, Loewen points out that this idea is rooted more in national pride than historical reality. He discusses how America has often acted out of self-interest rather than purely noble intentions. Examples like the Vietnam War, interventions in Latin America, and the exploitation of resources in other countries reveal that America's foreign policies have often been driven by economic and political goals rather than altruistic motives. By failing to question the narrative of American exceptionalism, textbooks encourage students to view the U.S. through a narrow, one-sided lens, overlooking both its strengths and its flaws. Loewen urges readers to think critically about this narrative, recognizing that America's story, like any nation's, is complex and multifaceted. How we can change the way history is taught. So, what can we do to change how history is taught? Loewen suggests several ways to approach history with a more critical, inclusive perspective. First, he encourages educators and students alike to question the narratives presented in textbooks and seek out alternative sources. History isn't just about memorizing dates and names. It's about understanding the diverse experiences and perspectives that have shaped our world. Second, Loewen advocates for including a wider range of voices in the history curriculum, such as those of marginalized groups who have often been left out of traditional accounts. This includes exploring primary sources, first-hand accounts, and perspectives that offer a fuller picture of historical events. Lastly, he reminds us that history is not static. It's an ongoing conversation that evolves as we gain new insights and understandings. By approaching history as a dialogue rather than a monologue, we can foster a more nuanced, accurate view of the past. Conclusion. In Lies My Teacher Told Me, James W. Loewen shines a light on the inaccuracies and biases that shape our understanding of American history. From the whitewashing of Native American history to the myths of American exceptionalism, the stories we learn in school often present a distorted picture of the past. But by challenging these narratives, asking difficult questions, and embracing a fuller view of history, we can move closer to understanding the complexities of America's journey. The true power of history lies not in glorifying heroes or avoiding uncomfortable truths, but in learning from the past so that we can create a more just, equitable future. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Lies My Teacher Told Me. We hope it inspires you to question, to learn, and to see history in a new light.